My name is Marcus Webb. I am 28 years old, and 6 months ago I watched my hometown empty out without a single car leaving the city limits, without a single moving truck, without so much as a goodbye. And I am the only one who seems to remember that the people here used to be different. Before everything went sideways, I was just a night dispatcher and part-time systems tech at the county emergency center. The guy in the black hoodie with the faded logo, dark jeans and steel-toe boots who sat in front of too many monitors and made sure bad news got routed to the right radios. The job was boring most nights, just drunk drivers, power outages and raccoons in dumpsters behind the grocery store, until the state offered hazard pay for what they called a rural infrastructure integration pilot, and my supervisor slid a separate binder across the console with a logo I did not recognize and said, "Sign this if you want to make real money." The binder was stamped with a clean black circle and 3 letters inside, AEG, and most of the pages were redacted. Whole sections of text blacked out so thoroughly they might as well have been ink spills. But the parts I could read said the same thing over and over in slightly different lawyer language. I would not talk about what I saw. I would follow on-screen protocols exactly. And if a certain type of emergency alert came through, I would not improvise, question, or delay. I signed because the pay bump meant I could finally get out of my moldy one-bedroom above the laundromat and maybe replace the truck that stalled at every yellow light. Training for the new system lasted exactly 17 minutes. A man from the state who never gave his name stood behind my chair and had me log into an extra console that had appeared overnight at the far end of the desk, a matte black unit with no manufacturer label, just a slot for my badge and a status light the color of dried blood. "This is tied to the federal lattice," the man said. "You do not originate anything from here, you only relay. Most of the time you will see test traffic, you will acknowledge, you will go back to sleep. Once in a while, you will see something flagged in red. Those messages are not for the public. You will route them only where the system tells you." I asked him what the alerts would be about. He ignored that and flipped the binder to a laminated page labeled Special Conditions, running his finger down the list until he stopped halfway. "If you receive any alert mentioning behavioral displacement, verbal duplication or replacement phenomena," he said, "you lock the building, you stay away from the windows, you do not answer to your own name if you hear it outside, and you do not try to leave town until someone from my office calls this desk. Understood?" I made some joke about body snatchers, trying to lighten the air, but his face did not move. He just looked at my hoodie like I had already failed some invisible test. The first month with the lattice was quiet. The console flashed health checks, silent test tones and strange phrases tagged internal use only. Every once in a while something like Project HOLLOWKEP or Project Sanction would scroll past in the headers, but the content was scrambled into code and acronyms. Life in town went on the way it always had, same men at the diner counter every morning, same 2 deputies patrolling the same 3 streets after dark, same bored teenagers at the gas station. If anything felt different, it was subtle, a kind of background tension that made my shoulders knot by the end of every shift, like the air over Grayford had thickened. Then 3 nights before the first person changed, the console chimed in a tone I had never heard, a low descending 3-note pattern that seemed to sink into my teeth. A black banner slid across the screen, Origin, DHS Black, Priority, Silent Grid, and then the words that were not supposed to be for the public wrote themselves slowly from left to right. Emergency alert, anomalous replacement behavior observed in grid GF17. Monitor for signs of displacement. Do not initiate evacuation. Do not acknowledge duplicates. My finger hovered over the function key for longer than it should have. A little window popped up saying route to, local agency only, and when I confirmed, the system sent the alert to a single locked printer in the sheriff's office and one secure inbox I did not have clearance to open. No sirens, no message on phones, no crawls on television. Just me and that sentence sitting in the glow of the monitors at 3 in the morning, while the town outside slept. I told myself it had to be some kind of code for a drill, some bureaucratic way of describing fraud or identity theft or election stuff. Anything but what it sounded like. 2 days later, the first man I had known my entire life walked into the center to report that his brother did not look like his brother anymore. The next day, our phones and televisions and the battered alert radio in the corner all screamed awake at once with a sound I had never heard from them. A roar of static the system labeled only as national priority, and the words on every screen matched the hidden header I had seen before. Emergency alert. Something is replacing the townspeople. The alert text was longer this time, a full block of capital letters telling everyone in Grayford to stay inside, secure all doors and windows, avoid direct contact with anyone showing sudden personality shifts, and wait for instructions from federal authorities. It never used the word replacement, never admitted that something might be wearing familiar faces wrong. It just called them anomalies and told people not to panic. I watched the progress bar crawl across the console as the message pushed to every phone, television, and radio in range. And for the first time it felt like I was firing a weapon instead of relaying information. Outside, the center window porch lights came on up and down the street. One truck pulled to the curb and sat with its hazards blinking, and the single patrol car in the square did a slow loop like the deputy inside was waiting for someone above him to say this was all a mistake. The night the alert hit, Grayford became a different place, a place where every familiar sound turned hostile and every shadow felt like it was waiting for its cue. And while the town panicked quietly behind locked doors, I sat in the emergency center staring at the console as it began spitting out messages faster than I could read them, each one colder than the last. Observed displacement event in progress, priority delta. Confirmed non-human mimetic patterning. Do not engage. Do not intervene. Do not open doors under any circumstance. I kept rereading Do Not Open Doors because a part of me refused to believe we were dealing with something that could mimic people well enough to fool their own families. But the messages kept coming, and the sense of dread that had been building since that first silent grid alert finally tipped into certainty when Sheriff Colton radioed in sounding nothing like himself. I'd known the man all my life, had heard him complain about deer season and property taxes and the state troopers who kept parking outside the diner, but that voice coming through the speaker, that was Colton, not in tone, not in cadence, not in anything. "Dispatch," he said, calm, too calm, like every syllable had been rehearsed. "Open the east door and let me in. I need inside right now." My hand hovered over the door controls, but something in the back of my skull screamed that this was wrong, that he wasn't supposed to sound like that Colton didn't talk like a man reading off a teleprompter. "Sheriff, confirm emergency priority," I said, trying to sound professional even though my voice wanted to crack. Silence. Then, "Marcus, Marcus, Marcus." 3 times, same pitch, same rhythm, like a skipping record. That was when every hair on my arm stood up. The console flashed another alert, VERIFIED duplication. Deny entry, hold position. I didn't touch the door. The voice outside stopped. The headlights of the patrol car turned off one by one like someone inside was learning how to use them. Then the radio clicked again with the faint hiss of open air and something whispered through the static, "Try again later." But it wasn't trying to convince me. It sounded like someone practicing a line. The lights in the hallway flickered. The generator kicked in even though we hadn't lost power. The atmosphere in the building went tight like the pressure had changed outside. I stayed glued to the screens until dawn, and around 6 a.m. the system finally spat out a softer message. "Stand by. Shelter. Observe." I took that as close to a break as the lattice was ever going to give me. I stepped outside the center into a gray morning and found the town square empty except for 2 figures standing completely still across the street, both of them familiar and wrong. The first was old Mr. Renner, who used to run the hardware store, wearing the same flannel jacket he always wore, but stiff, mannequin stiff, like his joints didn't bend right. The second was a kid I recognized from the gas station register, except his mouth was just slightly too wide, pulled at the corners like someone stretching a mask over a wire frame. They didn't blink, didn't look around, didn't breathe, not in any way I could see. They were placeholders waiting for something. I backed slowly toward the building, ears ringing, and that was when my phone vibrated with a new command from the lattice: return immediately. Do not engage. I slipped back inside and locked the door and spent the next 4 hours answering panicked calls from people who said their husbands, sons, brothers, neighbors had gone quiet, frozen, or were talking without emotion, like someone reading from a script they didn't understand. Some said the people they loved had walked outside in the night, barefoot, expressionless, and then returned at dawn with their clothes perfectly clean, their faces perfectly blank. One man sobbed over the line, begging me to help because his brother was standing in their kitchen facing the refrigerator, not moving, not speaking, and yet the voice calling to him from the front yard sounded exactly like the same brother. I didn't know what to tell him. The system wouldn't let me give advice. Every time I tried to improvise, a red warning flashed across my console scolding me into silence. By noon, the situation escalated. A new alert hit the screens, bigger, bolder, accompanied by a vibrating pulse that shook the desk. Priority Omega mimetic spread expanding. Observe 4 replacement patterns. Remain inside. I looked toward the window. 9 new figures stood in the square now, scattered but facing outward. None moved. None reacted to the wind. They were stations, anchors, filling space where real people should have been. That was when the first real townspeople finally tried to flee. A truck roared down Main Street with 2 brothers I recognized as the Millers, both carpenters, both good men, both terrified as they leaned out the windows screaming that something in their house wasn't their father. They hit the intersection at 50 miles an hour, and the road in front of them simply folded. That's the only word I have for it. One moment the street was there, the next it bent upward like someone had flipped a rug, rising in a ripple that sent the truck airborne. It hit something invisible and crumpled like a soda can. The brothers stumbled out, bleeding, dazed, and the still figures in the square turned their heads toward them in perfect unison. Not fast, not slow, just timed, synced. One of the men screamed and limped toward the emergency center, pounding on the door, yelling at me by name. "Marcus, please, let us in. They're not people, they're not." But the system flashed red. "Do not open doors for identifiers. Do not acknowledge personal names." The pounding stopped, his voice didn't. "Marcus, Marcus, please." The cadence shifted, flattened, became mechanical. I backed away from the door as the voice sharpened, like whatever was outside was learning me, adjusting. When the screaming stopped, something taller than a human shape slid across the frosted glass panel of the door, too smooth, too fluid, like a person without joints. I did not breathe until it moved away. By late afternoon, Grayford had changed entirely. People wandered in and out of their homes with faces that looked sculpted rather than expressive. Men walked in loops around the same blocks, stopping, turning, returning to identical positions. 9-year-olds who never stood still a day in their lives sat perfectly rigid on porches, staring straight ahead. And worst of all, some people were doubled, an original inside the house, and a second version outside calling through the window in its voice. That evening, the lattice finally sent a message I had never seen before, a full-screen takeover that blacked out every monitor, high-risk replacement in progress. Await federal intervention. Do not attempt to flee. All exits sealed. Something in my stomach dropped when I read that, because they weren't warning us about something approaching. They were admitting something was already here, already inside the boundaries, already doing its work. And then, just as the sun dipped low and the sky turned red, something moved behind me in the reflection of the console, something wearing my posture, my height, my black hoodie, standing silently in the far corner of the room where no one should have been. When I turned toward the reflection in the console and saw that thing shaped like me standing in the far corner of the room, every thought in my head collapsed into a single frozen second where my brain refused to process what it was seeing, because the figure wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, wasn't even blinking. It was just standing there like a mannequin wearing my face, my black hoodie, my jeans, my boots. And the worst part was that it looked slightly wrong. like someone had made me out of wet clay and hadn't quite smoothed the edges, the shoulders too square, the arms too long, the head tilted at an angle a living spine couldn't manage, and yet its outline was unmistakably mine. I didn't turn around. I couldn't because every instinct I had screamed that if I looked at it directly I would confirm something I was not prepared to accept. So I kept my eyes locked on the reflection while my breath hitched and the console screens flickered with fresh warnings. Replication event confirmed, do not engage, do not acknowledge, do not look directly at model. Model like I was a blueprint, a template to be copied. My throat tightened as I glanced down and realized the thing's reflection wasn't casting a correct shadow, its silhouette stretching sideways across the floor instead of behind it, like light bent wrong around it. I forced myself to exhale as quietly as I could and reached slowly toward the emergency shutter control under the desk. But before I touched it, the overhead lights snapped off in perfect synchronized sequence, row by row, until the room plunged into absolute blackness, the only illumination coming from the dim red emergency strips along the floor. I heard it then, a soft, wet shifting sound like something adjusting its limbs without bones, and I felt the air pressure in the room change as if it had moved closer. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare. Then the console rebooted suddenly, screens flashing white before refilling with red warnings that scrolled faster than I could read. Lattice breach in progress, identity field destabilized, replacement model active, do not allow physical contact. My pulse hammered through my skull as the air behind me vibrated faintly, like a low hum forming words it hadn't learned yet, and then, God help me, it spoke with my voice, almost my voice, a warped, slowed-down version of it that stretched and tightened syllables like someone imitating a recording played on broken tape. M. Arcus. I felt sweat drip down my back. It said it again, a little clearer, a little more correct, like it was analyzing me. Ma Arcus. Web B. Hearing your own name in your own voice spoken by something standing behind you is a violation of the soul, and every instinct I had screamed to run. But the building itself sabotaged me. The doors sealed, the vents locked, the generator surged, and the lattice console gave one final command in a tone I had never heard before, deeper, heavier, as if the machine itself was terrified. Do not move. Do not respond. Do not look. The thing's hand, my hand, lowered onto the metal cabinet beside it, fingers distending in ways mine never could, stretching like warm plastic before snapping back into shape. Then it said one word with perfect clarity, close. I didn't understand, close what? Close the distance, close the gap, close my eyes. But I didn't have time to process because the fire alarm suddenly erupted, shrill and violent, flooding the room with flashing white strobes. And in that split second, I saw it fully illuminated for the first time, and the sight will follow me into whatever nightmare waits after death. The creature wearing me wasn't solid. Its skin rippled constantly like a surface of water under pressure, its facial features melting and reforming in an endless loop of almost right shapes, its chest rising and falling in uneven, jerking movements like it was still learning how lungs worked. And its eyes, God, its eyes, were wrong in a way I cannot explain, because they were shaped like mine, but inside them was nothing. No reflection, no depth, only a blackness so complete it looked carved. It jerked toward me in a way no human body could move, too fast, too silent, and I threw myself backward over the chair as it collided with the console, the screens shattering with a sharp electrical crack that threw sparks across the room. I scrambled toward the secondary exit, slamming my shoulder into it until it popped open just enough for me to squeeze through, and I ran down the hallway in the pulsing emergency lights, every shadow threatening to move, every doorway a possible mirror of myself waiting to replace me. The building's intercom switched on with a harsh buzz, and a new automated voice I'd never heard came through the speakers. Replacement breach in admin wing. Isolate survivor. Protect identity. The word survivor terrified me more than the creature, because it implied the system already expected casualties. As I reached the stairwell, I heard multiple footsteps echoing from below, too heavy, too asynchronous to belong to one person. And when the emergency light flickered, I saw silhouettes climbing, lurching upward, each one bent, each one shifting, each one wrong. Copies, more than one. Copies of who, I didn't know, didn't want to know. I bolted upward to the roof access ladder, climbed 2 rungs at a time, and burst onto the rooftop just as the town's sirens wailed again. Not the standard tornado tone, but a deeper, warbling modulation labeled on the panel as replication event Tier 3. Below me, Grayford moved like a broken simulation, people walking in synchronized loops, others standing still in perfect rows facing the same direction. Some doubled, some tripled, some changing shape like unfinished versions of themselves. And then across the parking lot, I saw my own truck pull in, engine running, headlights on, and a figure stepped out wearing my hoodie, my jeans, my boots. But its movements were too stiff, too puppet-like. And after a moment 2 more stepped out behind it, all of them arranged in a perfect line, all of them staring up at me with those hollow, unfinished eyes. And as the wind whipped across the rooftop carrying the metallic scent of the changing town, all 3 of my replacements spoke at once with perfect synchronized rhythm. Marcus Webb, your place is open. The 3 versions of me in the parking lot didn't move after they spoke, just stood there in a rigid line with my truck idling behind them, exhaust drifting around their legs like they were props in a scene somebody else had staged. And the way they said, "Your place is open," echoed inside my skull like it was more than words, like it was a system notification for something I couldn't see. Slot available, insert model here. The lattice console inside had called them replacement models. And now I understood what that actually meant. Grayford wasn't just a town anymore. It was a grid of identity slots in some black project called HOLLOWKEP. And whatever had slipped in through the federal emergency infrastructure was filling those slots with copies built out of sound and habit and shape. The original people weren't being killed outright, not at first. They were being overwritten, their bodies turned into walking receivers for something hungry. If the 3 things below were right, my slot was empty, which meant it wanted me gone more than dead. It needed me to surrender the last real part of me, the part that still insisted I was Marcus and not just structure waiting to be occupied. I stepped back from the rooftop edge, heart pounding, and my boots scraped gravel loud enough that one of the copies snapped its head in my direction with unnatural speed, neck twisting too far before correcting. From this height I could see its face more clearly. The bones were almost perfect, but the expression sat wrong, like someone had pasted a neutral mask over a skull that didn't know how to move it, and its eyes were still those awful empty wells. The emergency center door below clicked open by itself, and a 4th figure stepped out, shorter, older, wearing Sheriff Colton's uniform, his sheriff's hat, his walk, but not his soul. The mimic in his clothes raised a hand and pointed up at me, and every copy of me below turned its head upward in sync. My radio buzzed on my belt at that moment, like it wanted to jump off, and for a second I thought the lattice had finally realized what was happening and was going to tell me how to fix it. But when I yanked it up to my ear, all I heard was my own voice, calm and tired, maybe from weeks ago, saying, "You can't win this, Marcus. You can only choose how you get replaced." I almost hurled the radio off the roof, but a different idea hit me mid-swing hard enough to stop my arm. The lattice wasn't just a conduit for them. It was also my only way to talk to anyone outside this grid. All night it had been pushing orders into Grayford. Don't flee, don't open doors, don't disrupt the system. But if I could hijack that channel, if I could get one message out beyond whatever invisible fence was keeping us here, I might be able to warn someone that the project they thought they were containing had slipped its collar. More selfishly, I might be able to corrupt my slot in the system so badly nothing could ever fit in it again. I dropped back through the roof hatch and slammed it shut, spinning the manual lock so hard I skinned my knuckles, then sprinted down the narrow stairwell toward the main lattice console room. As I descended, the intercom speakers crackled to life, and for a second I braced for my own voice again, but this time the tone was different. It was the cold, synthetic system voice, deeper now, like it was straining under interference. Grid GF17, it said, entity behavior exceeding predictions. Project HOLLOWKEP status compromised. Operator MARCUS web, identity anchor flagged. Stand by for reclamation. Identity anchor. That's what I'd become. The one genuine node left in a network of copies, the last original keeping the pattern stable. Take me out, slot in the copy, and the grid would calcify, seamless, perfect. No evidence left that anything had changed. I hit the main floor hard and cut through the dim hallway toward the console, boots splashing through thin streaks of something that might have been water or might have been whatever passed for blood in the things outside. When I burst into the control room, the main monitors were already waiting for me, not in standby but with a new interface I'd never seen. Red and black, no icons, just text. Project HOLLOWKEP, Lattice Control Operator Access Override. A prompt blinked. Do you wish to surrender identity slot GF17? A. Yes, no. My hand actually twitched toward the keyboard, not because I wanted to give in but because seeing no sitting there implied that the system actually respected the answer, that it would let me say no and walk away. That was a lie, of course, but lies are more dangerous when they give you the illusion of choice. I stabbed the S key instead, backing out of the prompt, and dove into the configuration menus as fast as my fingers would move. Half the options were grayed out. The ones that weren't had names like regional alert paths and containment, field integrity, and ECHOFRAME carrier table. I ignored the last two and focused on the one thing I knew how to do. Send alerts. Not the local kind, not the ones that bounced around Grayford and came back to die, but the ones that rode the whole federal spine all the way out. The system didn't want me touching those. Every time I clicked anything tagged national, a red box popped up, requires black level authorization. But the more I tried to force it, the more resistance I felt, not just from code, but from the presence bleeding through the infrastructure. The speakers whispered in my voice, the vents sighed in my voice, the light hum deepened into a subsonic growl that made my ribs buzz. Marcus, three versions of me said at once from different corners of the room, even though I couldn't see anything in the dimness beyond the glow of the monitors. We can do this together. You root, we replace. Everyone wins. I slammed a fist onto the desk hard enough to make the screen wobble. Shut up, I said, and for once I didn't feel the system scold me for speaking. The lattice seemed distracted, like it was fighting itself. A corner of the admin window blinked with an error. Identity conflict, slot GF17. A/GF17. For the first time, the machine side admitted there was more than one of me. I dug deeper and found a testing suite the HOLLOWKEP engineers had probably used to simulate different alert scenarios before pushing them live. One option was labeled full stack drill, grid failure. Another was marked cascade. The third had no label at all, just a code. I00. I opened it expecting nothing, and a blank composition window appeared with a single rule. Any text entered here will be broadcast to all lattice-connected devices if override token present. They won't let you, my voice murmured from the vents, a little less confident now, like the thing was trying to divide its attention between me and the rest of the town. You're a relay, not an origin. You're a gauge, not a gun. Maybe that was true yesterday. Tonight, everything was on fire. On a hunch, I reached into my hoodie pocket and pulled out the black laminated card the state man had given me the day they installed the console. The one he'd said was for absolute emergencies only, in a tone that suggested nuclear launch codes. I'd never used it, never even scanned it. Its back carried a label in tiny print. Operator Crisis Override 1 Use. I slid it into the reader slot. The console paused like it was thinking, then flashed. Token accepted, I00 access granted. The composition box unfroze. The entire room seemed to inhale. Outside, something heavy hit the exterior wall, rattling the frame, and my own voice from three directions screamed in panic. Stop. I put my hands on the keyboard, every finger shaking, and started typing, not protocol, not sanitized language, but the only thing that mattered, the truth no one up the line wanted getting out. Emergency alert. This is MARCUS Web, Grid GF17. Something is replacing the townspeople. Federal Lattice Project HOLLOWKEP is compromised. Do not trust anyone showing sudden personality change or duplication. If you receive this, you are connected to the same system. Your town may be next. Do not surrender identity. Do not open doors for your own voice. As I typed voice, every speaker in the room screeched at once, a chorus of my throat tearing. If you send that, one of me rasped from just behind my shoulder, close enough that I felt something cold and damp brush the back of my hoodie. We won't be able to hide in the gaps anymore. They'll see us. They'll panic. They'll shut down the grids. There will be nowhere left to go but out. Good, I said, surprised at how steady I sounded, and hit send. The console did not blast a siren, did not play a tone, did not give me the satisfaction of a progress bar. It simply flickered once, then displayed. I-00 dispatched. Irreversible. Outside, a deeper siren I'd never heard before roared to life. Not the local horns, not the town's, something higher, angrier, riding the power lines themselves. The emergency center shook as if something massive had just dropped onto it from a height, and the last thing I saw on the lattice screen before it blew out into static was a single line of system text that made my blood run cold, even as some buried part of me felt vindicated. Global flag set. Replacement threat acknowledged. 6 months have passed since the night I triggered I-00. 6 months since I stood in the emergency center, surrounded by unfinished copies of myself, and watched the lattice really recognize, for the first time, that something had infiltrated its infrastructure, something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that saw human identity as nothing more than software to be overwritten, and I wish I could say that everything resolved neatly after that. That federal team swept in with containment suits and flamethrowers, and rescued whoever was left in Grayford. But the truth is uglier and quieter in the ways real horror usually is. The moment my alert went out, the building shook like the entire grid was having a seizure. Lights blew one after another, sparks rained from the ceiling, and every speaker in the center vomited static so violently I thought my eardrums had ruptured. The copies, 4 of me, 3 different townspeople, one half-formed thing in Sheriff Colton's skin, jerked like puppets in a hurricane, their bodies glitching, stuttering, frames skipping as if whatever intelligence piloted them had been yanked in 1,000 directions at once. One screamed without breath, mouth open too wide, jaw bending wrong, and the others joined in until it became a layered mechanical shriek that vibrated through my bones. Somewhere beneath all of it, I felt the shift, an atmospheric drop, a pressure change, a sensation like a massive invisible net ripping open. Then everything went dark. Not normal darkness, not the powers out darkness, but a suffocating black so thick it felt like the air had been painted over. The emergency lights didn't come back. The screens didn't reboot. The intercom didn't hiss. It was absolute. I don't know how long I lay there on the floor, half-conscious, breathing smoke and dust, but when I finally stumbled outside into the early morning light, the town of Grayford was empty. Not destroyed, empty. Houses untouched, streets quiet, doors locked from the inside, coffee pots left half full, phones on chargers, every car in every driveway, but no people, not originals, not copies, nothing. Every living shape, every placeholder, gone like the town had been erased with a single keystroke. I wandered like a ghost through neighborhoods I'd known my whole life, calling names I wasn't sure belonged to real people anymore, looking for any sign that the world I remembered hadn't been overwritten. Nothing. Not even footprints. The state police found me on the edge of the highway at dawn, shivering in my black hoodie, covered in dust and dried blood that wasn't mine. They took me in, asked questions, tried to piece together the events leading to the communications malfunction and localized mass evacuation. Their polite, bureaucratic lie for what had happened, but they didn't believe anything I said about duplicates or identity slots or the lattice behaving like a living structure. They ran tests. They scanned my head. They evaluated me. And every time I tried to explain Project HOLLOWKEP or the replacement grid, they exchanged glances like I'd lost my mind. They released me after a week with no charges, no answers, and no explanation for why an entire town had vanished overnight. I moved 3 times in the month since, new county, new job, new everything, because someone from an agency I'd never heard of showed up at my door 2 weeks after the incident, asking if I'd experienced any personal fragmentation or if I'd heard myself speaking from unfamiliar places. I slammed the door, packed my truck, and left that night. But running hasn't helped. I still don't sleep more than an hour at a time. I still can't walk past a mirror without checking that my reflection actually moves when I do. And every few nights, just around 3 a.m., when the world gets too quiet and the house feels wrong, I hear it, my voice, perfectly calm, perfectly precise, coming from somewhere just outside the window saying, "Marcus, your place is still open." Sometimes it says, "We lost our anchor." Sometimes, "You broke the grid." Sometimes it just whispers my name over and over like it's practicing again, smoothing the edges, waiting for the right moment to try the door. I've smashed my phone 3 times because it keeps turning on by itself and opening an old emergency alert interface I haven't used since the night everything ended. The screen flashes the same sequence every time. Grid GF17, incomplete. Identity slot, vacant. Model required. They are still out there, whatever they are, unfinished, untethered, hungry, and they haven't forgotten that I am the only anchor that ever broke free. The lattice may have collapsed in Grayford, but I don't think it died. I think it scattered, moved, slid into other towns and systems, waiting for alignment, waiting for structure, waiting for the next operator to open the wrong door or answer to the wrong voice. 6 months ago, I triggered a global flag, something the system never meant to acknowledge. I warned everyone connected to the lattice that replacement was real. Maybe someone heard me. Maybe others like me saw the early signs. Or maybe I just doomed us all by exposing a nest that wasn't done spreading. All I know is this: if you ever hear your own voice calling from outside your house, if you ever answer your name and feel the air get heavier, if you ever see someone you know freeze in place like a puppet waiting for a script, lock your doors, cover your mirrors, leave the lights off, and do not respond. Because something learned to wear us. Something learned to speak us. And something out there still knows my name, still knows my shape, and still wants what it started. It wants me replaced, and it's getting closer.